This is Dr. Z, Zachary Brooks, and I'm here with my friend Goodyear, and this is my podcast about bilingual decision-making. Today I'm going to talk about a subject I chose for my dissertation. A dissertation is like doing homework for 2 years. It sounds like a bad decision. In some cases it is, because it certainly drives you crazy when you're doing this homework for 2 years. But in the end, I ended up with something I find super fascinating called bilingual decision-making. So I'm recording this podcast from your favorite local library. It's an awesome place. Check it out sometime. So today I'm going to start geeking out about bilingual decision-making and invite you to come with me and share your own thoughts about a topic I find fascinating, but even better, a topic that everyone can and does have an opinion on. The reason why is because almost all of us interact with people who come from different language and cultural backgrounds. And since we live in an interconnected world, we might as well do it very well. So once again, this is Dr. Z. Zachary Brooks with my friend Goodyear, talking about bilingual decision-making. Topic 1. So what is bilingual decision-making? Well, quite simply, bilingual decision-making is the study of how decisions can change as a function of language competence. In other words, if you're from another country and you live in the United States and English is your second language, would you make a decision that's different from a person who speaks English as a first language? When you ponder that question, let's take a step back and talk about decision-making generally. So decision-making is the action or cognitive process of selecting from alternatives. That should make sense to anyone because we make over 30,000 decisions daily. Now, many of those maybe aren't conscious at all. They're just sort of motorized programs in our brain that we decide to open the door, but we have sort of a motor memory. We put our hand out, we grasp the door handle, and we turn it one way or the other. But when we talk about decision-making, usually we think in terms of conscious choices, and usually we think about choices that have consequences as well. So for people who study decision-making, and it might be hard to believe, but there are actually a lot of people who study decision-making, these people oftentimes will focus on bad human decisions. And the reason why is because we, as humans, make lots of bad decisions. Just think about a person you dated previously, and you might remember a moment when you didn't make the best decision. That's just one way to study decisions. In fact, there are generally 3 ways in which people have studied decision-making and continue to study decision-making. The first is called normative decision-making. In other words, normative is like saying the best decisions, the best possible decisions, given all the time, all the money, and all the energy, and all the best brain power you possibly could have in any given moment. The problem with this way of studying decision-making is that it assumes that there's a perfectly rational person with all the time, money, and energy in the world, like we just said, to make a great decision. But how many people do you know always make the best decision? If you're like me, probably not that many. The second way to study decision-making is called descriptive decision-making. Now, this is an approach that actually appreciates how bad our decisions can be. Think about a doctor operating on the wrong side of someone's body. Oops. This is not a good decision, but it's important to study bad decisions to see how we can actually make better decisions. And it's also important to study bad decisions to see actually how we process the world around us. When we notice our bad decisions, we are ready to make better decisions. Which brings us to the third type of decision-making line of inquiry, the line of study, which is called prescriptive decision-making. This kind of research looks at the bad decisions we make and the decisions we could have made if we had time, money, energy, etc. This looks at the bad decisions we actually make, the decisions we could have made in order to improve our decision-making. So maybe you had 5 bad dates on Tinder, but eventually you learn what to look out for and you make possibly a better decision. So we're back. This is Dr. Z, Zachary Brooks, with my friend Goodyear. And the topic in this section is how do we get the bilingual part of decision making? So from an academic perspective, the bilingual part comes from the fields of applied linguistics and the very related field of second language acquisition. So this group of geeks studied the process of acquisition, comprehension, and production of a new language. In other words, while you're struggling to learn a new language, these people are studying you. So the way they study the process of learning languages encompasses everything from cultural kind of issues to cognitive issues. For example, let's say you want to learn a new language, but while you're doing so, you don't quite identify with the people or the sounds of the language or the culture, the music, the food, the traditions. If you don't identify in some way with that new language and that new culture, it's going to be much harder for you to learn that language. On the other hand, even when you do identify, even when you find that new culture fascinating and you like the sounds of the new language, sometimes learning new language as an adult, in particular, is very difficult, simply because your brain has a hard time learning this new information, and that would be a cognitive perspective. So a couple of approaches to studying people learning languages include eye tracking studies. This is more about reading, but I think eye tracking studies is a good way to give an example because it's very visual. So eye tracking, just like it sounds, you track the eyes. Now, generally, you track the eyes while people read. The patterns that people's eyes follow during reading is really fascinating for researchers. Now, do you think that first and second language speakers are going to have different eye patterns when they read? Well, in the end, they really don't. But second language speakers, not surprisingly, read a little bit slower. Another way to look at studying new languages is something called lexical studies. So lexical or lexicon is a way of saying dictionary or words. So all those sort of things relate to words, lexicon, dictionary. So one way to study this is to study how first and second language speakers access and process and produce new words. Not surprisingly, second language speakers are a bit slower to recognizing words than first language speakers. We'll throw one other concept out there before we move on to the next section, and that concept is called interlanguage. Now, interlanguage refers to the language that is used by people who are learning a second language, but what they're actually doing, they're using a language that resembles both the second language and the first language. So let's say someone is in the United States trying to learn English. They're still using the grammar, let's say, the syntax, the word order of their first language, but now they're starting to put in new vocabulary that doesn't fit in their first language, because when you're in a new country, suddenly you have to use new words, and sometimes what you do is you just take those words and plop them in to your current language. Over time, that language can change enough that it becomes a second language. But in the meantime, it's called interlanguage. So if you've ever traveled and you've been on vacation and you mix up words, you understand the process and the concept of interlanguage very intuitively. Hello again, this is Dr. Z, Zachary Brooks, with my friend Goodyear. So topic 3, types of decisions. So now that we've talked about decision making, good decisions, bad decisions, and how to improve our decisions, and now that we've talked about how learning language can be studied from cultural perspectives, cognitive perspectives, and we even looked at something called interlanguage. That's the language that we use when we're transitioning between our first and our second language. We can now move on to a next question. It's a pretty big question, and you might have anticipated this question already. But when I talk about bilingual decision making, people almost always ask me, what kinds of decisions? And in fact, that's a good question. No, it's a fantastic question. Every episode of this podcast is designed to explore how decisions can change as a function of language competence. So I'll start the podcast with my investigations, and I'll branch off into other areas. There are very smart people working in many parts of the world in different academic fields who are studying something like bilingual decision making. And if they aren't, they should, because it's pretty fascinating, and it's nice to be able to investigate the world and figure out how we can interact with each other much better. So let's start with a word. The word is going to be probable. What do you think of when you hear the word probable, or probably? Which sentences come to mind when you hear the word probable or probably? For example, it will probably rain tomorrow. So what does that mean? It means that there is better than 50% chance that something will happen, in this case tomorrow, in this case rain. But what if I ask you to give me a number between 1 and 100 for probable? Think of a number. You got the number? Good. Maybe you would say 50%, 60%, 7%, or 80% between 1 and 100. Or maybe you have your own number. Now, would that number change if someone were speaking English as a second language? According to my research, the answer is yes. For example, if it is rare for Sandra to go jogging, how many times per month does Sandra go jogging? Your job is to give a number between 1 and 30 and ask yourself, would there be a difference between the numbers for first and second language speakers? That is, would first and second language speakers give different numbers between 1 and 30 for the word rare? It turns out first and second language speakers do give different numbers. One group gives higher numbers on average. Can you guess which group provides higher numbers for the word rare? If it is rare for Sandra to go jogging, how many times per month does Sandra go jogging? In my research, second language speakers gave higher numbers in this sentence, but also in 9 other sentences. Why would that be? Why would a second language speaker give a higher number for the same word, probable, when using English as a second language? One of the reasons probably has to do with how people perceive risk in an environment where they have to use their new language. So people probably want to give themselves more chances to be correct, so using 7% instead of 5% provides more room for error. Another way of thinking about this is that second language speakers want to give themselves fewer chances to be incorrect. So the next time you're using your second language and you use a word like rare or probable, think about how you're assessing risk in a world using your new language. So we're back. This is Dr. Z, Zachary Brooks, with my friend Goodyear. So thanks for tuning in to the first podcast on bilingual decision making. I hope you appreciate how speaking another language can help you see the world in a whole new way, and sometimes how decisions can vary when you're using your second language or when you're interacting with someone who is using their second language. Now, does this mean the decisions that someone makes when using their second language is worse? I don't know. I don't think so, but subscribe to find out, as next time we will look at ethical decision makings and how people's decisions may vary in their second language versus their first language when they're making a very hard decision about ethics. In the meantime, happy deciding.